Qatari negotiators are in Tehran to hold meetings with Iranian officials in an effort to de-escalate tensions with the U.S. Mediators are hoping to keep the interim ceasefire deal in place. The U.S. and Iran signed that deal more than 3 weeks ago, but there's been an exchange of airstrikes over the last several days. The mediation may have been made more difficult after U.S. President Donald Trump said on social media, the Islamic Republic of Iran has asked us to continue talks. We have agreed to do so. But the United States has stated in no uncertain terms that the ceasefire is over. Well, in the last hour, Iran's foreign ministry said it did not request negotiations with the U.S., but accepted the Qatari mediators' visit to Tehran. Going to get more on President Trump's comments with our White House correspondent, Kimberly Halkett. She's joining us live from Washington, D.C. So we've got strong words from Washington. According to the president, it seems negotiations are still on the cards.
That's right. Even though both sides are now using tougher rhetoric, neither has said that they've given up on diplomacy. And contrary to what is coming out of Iran, the United States has said that Iran has asked to continue negotiations, which the U.S. said it agreed to. And at the same time, the U.S. president also once again expressing some of that exasperation he showed back at the end of the NATO summit earlier this week when he said that the ceasefire is essentially over. He also said back then that the memorandum of understanding seemed to be over. But again, he left open the possibility of diplomacy then, and he's doing the same now. Now, with respect to that, what we're hearing from the Iranian side is that they are also using their leverage and saying that the United States must respect their conditions. And so the takeaway here in Washington is really that both sides are using maximum leverage. This is a classic negotiating position and tactic. The United States, on the one hand, using economic and military. Iran, at the same time, saying that it will not negotiate under threat or at the barrel of a gun.
You mentioned the economic element there, Kimberly. The United States issuing new Iran-related sanctions. What more do we know about those? How much of a setback could this be to the negotiations?
Well, the United States believes that this could potentially advance negotiations and push Iran even further. What the United States has done through the Treasury Department is leveled sanctions against an individual by the name of Ali Ansari. He's a financier, a wealthy one in Iran, that the United States alleges has been working to create wealth through investment for not only members of the IRGC, but also the supreme leader, and doing so at the expense of the Iranian population still dealing and reeling with economic challenges and high inflation. Now, the United States also leveling sanctions against what they say are front companies or also shell companies. And so what they're arguing is that through the currency exchange or these companies, billions have been moved through the global financial system. And so as a result, the United States, with the announcement of these sanctions, freezing any assets that are currently in the U.S. system, and also threatening penalties against any countries that have helped to collaborate in generating some of this wealth.
Kimberly, thank you very much indeed. That's Kimberly Halkett there at the White House. Iran's top negotiator and parliament speakers also issued a statement on the conflict with the U.S. Mohammad Baghar Khalibaf says, "We have never stopped preparing to defend our country, and at any moment the Americans betray the understanding we are ready for full-scale defense." He adds that ending the war is a priority for the countries of the world, but everyone should know that this conflict will never end with Iran's surrender. Mahmoud Abdelwahed reports from the Iranian capital, Tehran.
There has been a flurry of diplomatic activities to rescue the stalled talks between Iran and the United States following the latest round of de-escalation. Now, today, Qatari negotiators are in Tehran to meet Iranian officials to de-escalate the tension and to create conditions for broader talks between Iran and the United States. But Iranian officials still seem to be skeptical about the Americans' intentions pertaining to the implementation of the Pakistani brokered memorandum of understanding, especially after the latest spate of attacks, the U.S. airstrikes that targeted several civilian and military infrastructure across 5 Iranian provinces and killed and injured dozens of Iranians. And also, especially after the latest statement by US President Donald Trump unilaterally ending the memorandum of understanding. Now, we've just heard from Mohammad Baqir Ghalibaf, the Speaker of Iranian Parliament and Chief Negotiator. He's just stated that during this recent conflict, Iran will never surrender. In fact, Iran is, according to Ghalibaf, is ready for a full-scale war. We have heard repeatedly from Iranian officials reiterating that Iran cannot give in under coercive diplomacy. In fact, they say that for them, in order for them to continue to with the talks with the United States has to implement the articles of the memorandum of understanding, especially Article number 1 pertaining to the ceasefire, including all fronts, including Lebanon. Article number 5 pertaining to Iran's sovereign right in managing the Strait of Hormuz, and Article number 10 pertaining to Iran's right to export its oil. Mahmoud Abdul Wahid, Al Jazeera, Tehran.
After 2 days of strikes between the US and Iran, leaders in neighboring Gulf countries are hoping that negotiations can get back on track. Al Jazeera's Victoria Gatenby has the latest from Doha.
Well, the threat level here in Qatar has returned to normal after the successful elimination of a drone attack on Thursday when the threat level had to be raised. But obviously, militaries across this region will be monitoring the situation very carefully, given US President Donald Trump's statement about the ceasefire being over, yet talks continuing. To that end, diplomatic activities are continuing at pace. We know Reuters are reporting that a Qatari delegation of negotiators are in Iran to meet with Iranian officials to try and de-escalate tensions and also create the conditions for broader negotiations so that the memorandum of understanding that was signed just 3 weeks ago can be built upon into some kind of peace agreement. While that's been happening in Iran, here in Doha, Qatar's foreign minister and prime minister has been having meetings with his Egyptian counterpart in a telephone call on Friday. They released a statement following that and said that there really needed to be a return to dialogue and diplomacy. And they said that what had been agreed in the memorandum of understanding had to be implemented in full to sort of shore up regional stability. So a lot going on behind the scenes diplomatically in this region. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera in Doha.
The mediators are trying to salvage the MOU signed by the US and Iran last month. Here are some of the terms that they agreed. Tehran and Washington pledged not to initiate war or any military operation against each other and to refrain from threats or the use of force. The US committed to start removing its naval blockade while Iran was to make arrangements for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days. The US was meant to issue waivers for the export of Iranian crude and petroleum products and release frozen assets. Harlan Ullman is a former senior naval officer. He's currently chairman of the Keloan Group. It's a strategic advisory. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Really good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed for being with us, Harlan. I want to bring up with you, first of all, just a couple of lines that we're getting via Reuters. Senior U.S. officials have been briefing the media. They are saying that Iran has told US officials that the recent attacks on shipping, those were the attacks that prompted this latest round of tit-for-tat attacks between the US and Iran, were from, quote, an errant part of their system. I want to get from you what you make of that and what that says about the fragility of the situation that we're facing at the moment.
It's very interesting because in 1964, in August, when a couple of the North Vietnamese PT boats attacked U.S. destroyers in the Tonkin Gulf. That attack was a mistake. That local commanders were not ordered to do so, but they did on their own volition. That may be what's happening here, that you may have Iranian Republican Guard troops attacking for reasons that were not authorized by the Central Command in Tehran. That's not impossible to think about. But look, here's the larger issue. Neither Iran nor the United States want to expand and escalate the war. From the American perspective, if that happens, oil prices are going to go sky high. the Dow is going to drop another 600 points in a day or two, and that's not going to work. And from Iran's position, look, the economy is in bad shape, and Iran does not want to see it being continually attacked, nor do the Gulf states. So my guess is that while this is very fragile, the forces for minimizing the tit for tat probably will prevail. But as you point out, Rob, it's still very, very volatile, and local commanders could turn this into a real bloodbath. So this is something we need to watch. But over the long term, I think both sides see it in their best interest to see if some kind of negotiation and diminution of the hostilities is possible.
Just before we came to you, I gave a list of some of the key points that were from the memorandum. And broadly speaking, the US and Iran seem to be working towards to try to make most of them work. The one bit that they can't seem to get nailed down is the pledge not to initiate any military operations against each other and to refrain from threats. Now, if you can't get that part done, that's part one of the memorandum. If they can't agree to that, what are the chances that they're actually going to be able to move ahead with any sort of meaningful, substantial talks?
Rob, the problem is that the MOU was not negotiated on the American side by professionals. That MOU is entirely one-sided in Iran's favor. And so it's very, very difficult for the United States to be able to deal with the MOU. Take the issue of Lebanon. How Lebanon got into this is really quite questionable, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu now has great leverage because all he has to do is to increase violence in Lebanon, and that drives the Iranians crazy. So we're stuck because the Americans had not negotiated a good deal, and that gives the Iranians a very, very strong position in terms of the MOU. That's why Donald Trump said he's going to reject it. But having said that, remember, during the Korean War that began in 1950, negotiations went on from 1951 for 2 years until a truce was arrived. And in this particular case, as I said, I think jaw is better than war. Will we see tit for tats? Will we see local commanders making mistakes? Certainly on the Iranian side, yes. But I hope that the need for both sides to maintain some degree of control over escalation. And Donald Trump, no matter what he said at the NATO summit about Iranian leaders being scum and worse, said that we are going to have technical discussions to try to come to some sort of agreement, because it is ultimately in the best interest of all sides.
I was just reading an article before we came on air that was positing that we should be looking at this period, if you like, in a different way, in that the US is determining a ceasefire is exactly that, a point at which the hostilities pause for a period of time, whereas Iran is actually looking at it in a different way, and they're seeing it as a transition period in which it is simply a different form of the original warfare and conflict that was going on. Should we be seeing this in a different way rather than a simple cessation of hostilities?
No, Rob, you're absolutely right. The way that the MOU was negotiated is entirely in Iran's favor, and so they're taking that literally. The Americans got the short end of the stick in this, and so now they're trying to negotiate from a position which is not justified under the MOU. So you have, on the one hand, the way the Iranians perceived the negotiation that they made, the Americans, who did not do as well as they should have, taking another view, and that's one of the issues, the difference of perceptions. And so I hope over the longer term, both sides will see that they need to have some kind, if not a ceasefire, but at least a diminution of hostilities. And I think over time that's likely to prevail. But as you point out, what happened in the Strait of Hormuz is that local commanders saw ships not transiting in the lanes that they were supposed to. And so local commanders acted without, I suspect, the authority of Tehran. Things like that can happen. But to repeat, oil prices go up, the economies get worse, global economies get deteriorating by and large because of this. Donald Trump will be under huge pressure. And remember, Iran still can control the strait. The Americans do not have sufficient force to come in and occupy Bandar Abbas, the northern end of the strait, and be able to control it. So for the time being, these negotiations will continue, but they are very, very fragile. Something could go wrong. But as I said, I suspect that ultimately some sort of an agreement will be reached at, even though hostilities will occur on both sides from time to time.
Harlan Ullman is chairman of the Cologne Group, and as always, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera. So thank you very much indeed.
My pleasure, Rob.